Good morning. As you fix your plates of delicious snacks, you can have a seat. We'll get started in just a minute. And this program and the refreshments are sponsored by our Creation Care Committee. So I'm going to turn this over to the chair of that committee, Neil Peterson, who's going to introduce our guest speaker. Let's see, can you hear me? I will turn it up a bit.
Speak directly. If you just send me an email, I'll put you on the distribution list. Spring Forest, a new monastic community outside of Hillsboro that she founded recently. Along with several friends, she tends a forest and a small farm and serves as the abbess. You'll learn more about the Spring Forest community this morning. I'd like to read a quote from Elaine's website. She says, "We are at the forefront of a new reformation, one that is freeing the Christian faith from the sinful structures of patriarchy, racism, classism, many phobias, and exploitative forms of mission and evangelism. The new Reformation is all about the emergence of a generous, hospitable, equitable form of Christianity that heals the wounds of the world. I believe much of the work for the church in the years ahead must focus on healing the wounds inflicted by Christendom so that the beauty and inclusive goodness of the gospel can be heard, seen, and experienced." I think that you'll find that Elaine's perspectives on Christianity are consistent with those of Brian McLaren, whose book, Do I Stay Christian?, has been the focus of many of our recent adult formations. Spring Forest also reinforces the mission of the Creation Care Committee and its commitment to regenerative, sustainable farming, environmental and racial justice, and respectful relationship with all of God's creation. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Heath, please.
Thank you, Neil. It's so nice to be here. This is my first time at this church, so I'm excited to be here with you. I'm going to grab my clicker here. And this is our community is called Spring Forest. We are 4 years old. We're a new faith community in the United Methodist Church, part of the North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. And now Episcopalians have a tradition of monasticism, but Methodists left that behind when they became Methodists. However, early Methodism was very much a lay monastic movement. I could make a good case for that. So what we're doing at Spring Forest is not only the good work around care for the environment, sustainable regenerative farming, justice work, particularly around immigration and indigenous justice, but we're also pioneering monasticism for Methodists, because my friends and I and some other folks are very convinced that we need this within Methodism, and it's faithful to our tradition. When the church is going through a time like it is now, you might be familiar with Phyllis Tickle's work. Have you read anything by Phyllis Tickle? The 500 years, there's a rummage sale every 500 years in the church, okay. So we're in one of those times now, and whenever the church is in one of those times where there's this conflation of troubles, there's a flowering of monasticism, a flowering of renewal movements. So Spring Forest is a part of that. We are a community of practice. In other words, we don't begin with doctrine or dogma, which is interesting for me. I have a PhD in systematic theology. But as leader of our community, I believe we need to begin with practice. And you might be familiar with the work of Diana Butler Bass. Have you read any of her books or heard her speak? She, along with Brian McLaren and a handful of other folks, are part of the leading writers for this new reformation that's happening in the church. And Diana Butler Bass wrote in her book, Christianity After Religion, that really what has to happen is for us to, first of all, for people to come to faith who have no faith or have no spiritual mooring. The spiritual but not religious people are the people who are completely turned off of religion. So first, people need to feel they belong with our community. And then while belonging, get to watch us behave and get to behave with us. And then belief emerges from belonging and behaving together. Our walk with God always begins with experience. It never begins with thoughts we think in our head. But we've had that backwards ever since the Enlightenment period. And part of what's changing now is a return to honoring of experience and realizing that first we need to belong and then we behave together. And this is how we practice our faith at Spring Forest. So we're very inclusive, we're very hospitable. We don't think of people in terms of us and them. We believe we're all just us. We all belong together, and we can journey toward God together. Oops. Let me get back here. All right. The other thing that about Spring Forest is we do our best to practice trauma-informed ministry because we're aware that so many people have been harmed by the church and carry spiritual trauma from bad experiences. And people have bad theologies of God, as if God is just eager to torture us and throw thunderbolts at us and things like that. So people carry religious trauma, but people also carry all kinds of trauma from lived experiences, from their families of origin, from being bullied at school, bullied at work, from all kinds of life experiences, from being part of a minority culture in a majority culture that is cruel and exclusive. And so we work hard to be trauma-informed in how we carry out our ministries and our presence in the world. I put some of my more recent books over on the table. One that's going to be coming out in April, published by Erdman's, is called Trauma-Informed Evangelism, that I wrote with a colleague and former student of mine, and there's a little business card there. You can take it, and there's a QR code. If you take your phone and click on it, then you can go to the website with Erdman's and read about that book. But I've written quite a bit about trauma-informed ministry, partly because I grew up with so much trauma myself, and experiencing Christ as my healer, and experiencing healing ways to read the Bible instead of harming ways to read the Bible. This is all part of my own lived experience. So I include that in how I lead my community. Well, here's some pictures from Spring Forest. I'll just give you a quick glance. You're always welcome to come out and visit. We have partnerships and friendships with many churches. So if your class, for example, would like to come out for a retreat day, or you'd like to come out and have a tour and a talk and a nice meal, some fresh veggies from our garden, we could always set that up. But you can see from these photos there's a lot going on at Spring Forest. Some of our sources of inspiration for what we do at Spring Forest, I've listed them on the slide here. You'll notice the Celtic Christian tradition figures into how we carry out our ministry and how we think about God and our neighbors. We're big fans of John Philip Newell. We use Celtic prayers from Iona for our morning prayer liturgy Monday through Friday. We do that on Zoom, and we have people from London, England, all the way to Houston, Texas, who participate in our morning prayer using that liturgy. We also have been inspired by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote a letter to his brother during World War II. Of course, you're familiar with Bonhoeffer, I would imagine, who was martyred. He was a Lutheran, a young Lutheran pastor and theologian. And he wrote in this letter to his brother, as Bonhoeffer observed the way the church was complicit with the rise of Nazism in Germany, both Protestant and the Catholic Church. He said the church of the future is going to have to be a new kind of monasticism that has nothing in common with the old other than a radical commitment to live the Sermon on the Mount. He said the time for that church has come. So he was writing, almost 100 years ago. And Bonhoeffer's perspective on the role of the church in the world and what it means to be theologically formed and to be a faithful church in the midst of a culture that's being where religion's being hijacked by politics. I believe the time has come, too, for a new kind of monasticism. And so Bonhoeffer's work inspires us, and I've listed several other sources there. These are some of my books where I have written specifically about new monasticism. And out at Spring Forest, the vision that I had been casting for a number of years and slowly living into with my husband and my community, that vision's now in full flower at Spring Forest. I began researching new monasticism that was both green, very concerned with care for the environment, very concerned with climate change, and very concerned with immigration rights, the rights of the people who are forced to migrate, and with indigenous justice. That really began formally in 2007 when I was at Perkins School of Theology, and I began creating alternative communities with my students across the city, outside of the classroom, because they were feeling called to that kind of ministry, but they didn't know how to do it and didn't have anywhere to go see what it might look like. So we created these and just kind of found our way along. This is a picture of some of my students and some of the refugees in those early years. We were gathered around in an apartment in a refugee neighborhood where we had a missional house church called New Day. This is the shape of our community. I find the Venn diagram useful. There are those of us who live there. There are 7 of us right now. We expect there will be 8 next year. And 2 houses, and we're multi-generational. We have been multicultural and multiracial living at Spring Forest, but right now we're white people. But our broader circles are multicultural and are multi-faith and diverse in every way you can possibly imagine. So there's the residential community represented by the pink circle, and then there's the yellow circle that represents our broader community. The broader community includes people who are attached in some way to another church, but who participate in Spring Forest because they can get their hands in the soil, literally. Or they can participate in a food bank, or they can participate in an ESL program and some of the other outreach ministries we have where their local congregation doesn't have those opportunities for them. So we have befriended numerous churches so that this is possible. And we don't usually have things happening on Sundays because we don't want to compete with people's Sunday worship experiences and things like that. So. And then there's the farm. So our property is owned by 2 couples, my husband and myself and another couple. It's 23 acres, and about 5 acres is under agricultural production, and the other 15 acres, or not 15, that's more than that, however many it is, take away 5, 18, is forest with trails and picnic tables and benches and some fire pits. There's a beautiful meadow, and so that land is used for retreat purposes. People come for day retreats. We have room for about 8 to 10 people to spend the night if a small group wants to come and have a retreat for a few days. And we have a constant flow through of people coming for retreats, all kinds of people. We had 22 Duke Health chaplains there for a retreat on the day the hurricane rains came. So my job was to stand at the end of the driveway and tell people where to park, so I was drenched. And the farm, I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. You can see, this is in 4 years, how many things have grown, how many ministries have emerged from Spring Forest. We just started 4 years ago. But our reach is in concentric circles because of the farm and because we have an online presence for our spiritual formation work. We have people, like I said, from around the world and around the country, around North Carolina, around the Triangle, and around Hillsborough that participate in things that we do. This is our lead team for our core community, and there are 17 people. Just wanted you to glance at that. We're so blessed to have several people with Masters of Divinity degrees. With 2 of us have doctoral degrees in theology. We have 2 retired engineer missionaries, and we have a retired deaconess who works on our immigration. She heads up our immigration justice ministries. So we have an incredible team of people. Because of the way we're structured, we don't have any slackers. You know what I mean by slackers? Yeah, people that regard church as a spectator activity. I mean, people can come and sit by the campfire with us and enjoy being there, but there's no structure for people just to kind of hang out at the edge and never get involved, because we're very relational and because we're practice-based. We're practice-based. We have a monthly worship gathering called Forest Feast that's on the third Saturday of each month, and it's really fun, and it's led by the community. So that's the worship gathering where we would sing and read the Bible together and things like that. This is Francis, a picture here. He was our founding pastor who pastored with me when we started Spring Forest. He's from Kenya, a very experienced farmer, mentored us in farming, and really was a wonderful colleague and friend to work with us as we got Spring Forest started. He was my student years ago in Texas and was a part of those common set of spiritual practices. So for us, these four areas are kind of like rubrics with bullet points underneath. So those of us who are leaders at Spring Forest are committed to living with this rule of life, and we are teaching it to everybody who has some part of Spring Forest, who participate in something, because we believe this is a good way to live in the world. So we are committed to being people of prayer, people who work together, people who share the table together, and people who do this for the sake of our neighbors together. So we have an outward-facing posture. And this is so simple, even children can remember it. Prayer, work, table, neighbor. And it's a structure that helps us to keep our focus in the right place. We don't believe in strategic planning. At Spring Forest, we believe in strategic intent. And our strategic intent is to live according to this rule of life and for our ministries to emerge from these practices. This is our Global Friends program I mentioned earlier, with support for refugees with our ESL program and with sponsoring families. We work with World Relief. We also work with Church World Service. And it's all really very rewarding. Hope for Humanity is the program I mentioned earlier about supporting justice for people who experience forced migration and for indigenous rights. Grow It is a program that we started. It's multicultural, it's multi-faith. We have sometimes as many as 6 or 8 languages spoken there. So it's a Wednesday morning program around young family wellness, and it's very much focused on creation care, on locally grown food. What we do is the families come. We have about 20 people in it right now. We have 2 professional chefs who work with us. We have a translator that works with us. A lot of our refugee families are from Afghanistan, so we have a professional chef who is also from Afghanistan and speaks the languages and serves as a translator. So we have a yoga teacher, and we have a little circle for the children with yoga stretches, and it's a welcoming song, and it's really sweet. And then the kids go for a walk. They go and feed the chickens. They go and brush the goats. They go through the forest. We have a mom from Brazil who does the forest teaching and helps them notice the mushrooms and the frogs and whatever else is out there. And then they come back and they go and pick some greens. We tell them what they're allowed to pick that day. And they bring it back, and the chef works with the children. They make a smoothie with kale or canola greens or spinach or whatever we have. And meanwhile, while the kids have been out walking and feeding chickens and all those things, the chef has been preparing a nutritious lunch that's delicious from vegetables we grow on the farm. So there's one little boy named Luca who's 3 years old, and he begs his mom to go back to, he calls us the cake farm because our chef makes cabbage cakes, and he loves the cabbage cakes. So it's a way for not only for the young families to learn about creation care and growing local food and all those kinds of things and eating healthy foods together and having some recipes, but it also is a place for cross-cultural friendships to blossom and for people for whom this is a new place to live to feel welcome and to feel that they belong with us. regardless of their background or their religion or whatever has happened in life, that we're there for them, and we're a community together. We have a number of emerging children's ministries. I'll kind of skip over this slide since we're thinking more about creation care today, but all of our ministries that are emerging come from the people. My perspective as the leader of the community is that I need to pay attention to what people are passionate about, what their stories are, what their sense of excitement is about, and then call forth ministries from the people around what they care about and what they're excited about. So I just keep a close eye and form good relationships with people, and then before you know it, we have all kinds of ministries blossoming that are coming from the people. And that's actually the way the Holy Spirit wants it to be. You can read about that in 1 Corinthians 13, right? 11, 12, 13. Right. We have a spiritual formation team of 6 people who are trained in spiritual formation ministries, spiritual direction, things like that, retreat work. And so we have a team of people. If an organization calls us and says they want to have a retreat, we have folks that can help design the retreat and resource it if need be. And really excited about this team. Those are our worship experiences. I mentioned those already. I mentioned the strategic intent and discernment. So let me just say a little bit more about our farm. We started a CSA. Do you know what a CSA is? A Community Supported Agriculture. That's where you can subscribe to a box of vegetables and some fresh eggs. We just finished last week our 23-week CSA for 2022. And we did our pilot of the CSA in the fall of 2021. So thank God there were enough vegetables every week. The beetles didn't get everything. But we grow everything naturally. We don't use any chemical pesticides or herbicides. We pick the beetles off manually and use sprays made out of chrysanthemums and peppers and things like that. So it's all natural and organic. We use the sheep and goats to keep the grass down and keep the pastures free from trees. And we use their manure. We collect their manure from the barn, and we make our own compost with grass clippings, leaves, vegetable matter from the gardens, the manure. Sometimes we have to buy additional compost, but it's all natural. There are no chemicals. So we're not certified organic, but our growing methods are organic methods. So our food is really delicious, healthy, and beautiful. And we are hoping to scale out our CSA for next year because that's our revenue stream. I work bivocationally, which means I don't get paid for being the abbess of our community. So I make my living teaching, leading retreats. I have a Social Security check, which is very small. So that's how I make my living. But we pay our farm workers living wages, and we pay our ESL teachers, we pay our translators, and we pay our administrator who keeps all the wheels turning for our community. So we pay them all a living wage. And our goal is for the CSA to not only generate enough income to pay for the cost of running the farm, but including paying for those workers, but also a little bit extra to help us with paying for our ESL teachers and paying for some of those resources that we use for our ministries with refugees. So all of that to say, what we have going at Spring Forest is an ecosystem where everything feeds into the whole for the health and well-being of the whole. Next door, in the house next door, there is a young couple with 2 young children. Their names are Tim and Gretchen Foley, and they have 2 young children. And Tim is a professional forester, so he keeps an eye on forest health for us. He's also a naturalist, so we have amazing photos, and we have a beautiful calendar coming out at Christmas time with photos he's taken and identified these different birds and other things. And then Gretchen is an environmental toxicologist. She has a master's degree from Duke. They both went to Nicholas School of the Environment. And so Gretchen keeps a sharp eye on soil health. And it helps us. She's kind of becoming our farm manager. Our farm management team is all women, which is interesting. And yeah, so that's what we're doing in terms of the environment and environmental care. I think probably that's a good time to stop and see if people have questions. Yeah. Gretchen?
Well, I just caught a glimpse of the slide before this one with the questions. I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about that, and maybe you referenced Phyllis Tickle and this 500 years.
Uh-huh.
I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yes. 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 So Gretchen asked if I could speak a little bit more about Phyllis Tickle's claim that every 500 years the church has a rummage sale and things change, systems change broadly in the church. And she also asked if I could say a little bit more about strategic intent versus strategic planning. I actually teach a seminar on strategic intent versus strategic planning. I teach it online through Neighborhood Seminary, which is a school for laity that I founded and I just retired from in May. But I can say a little bit about it. So we'll begin with that one. So strategic intent, these are some questions that we ask, discernment questions that we ask in our community in terms of following the Holy Spirit. Following the Holy Spirit. Strategic intent, first and foremost for me, has to do with, in terms of ministry, with following the Holy Spirit. You'll remember the story of the people, the Hebrew people coming up out of Egypt, and they go across the sea. Remember this? And the Bible tells us that every morning they would look and they would see where that pillar of cloud was, and they're supposed to follow the pillar of cloud. And at night, when they go to bed, I just imagine them, the pillar of cloud looked like a pillar of fire. There was sort of a flickering. And so I can imagine them at night, they'd go into their tent, and the last thing they'd see before they fall asleep is that flickering on the tent sides. And when they get up, they'd open the tent flap, they'd step out, and they'd say, "Where's the cloud? Because we're going there." So strategic intent is all about following the cloud, right? Following where God is calling us to be. So in order for the church to live with strategic intent instead of strategic planning, because we can do strategic planning without any input from God whatsoever. We can just think up some good ideas, and whoever has the most articulate mouth and maybe the most money and the most controlling, or let's say influential personality, can influence that strategic plan to go in the direction that he or she thinks it should go. But when we follow strategic intent, and it's about following the Holy Spirit, we need to develop good discernment practices in community. So these are some of our practices. We try to pay attention to who and what is coming toward us. Who's coming toward us? What is coming toward us? Because we believe that God comes toward us in who or what is coming toward us. So for example, there was a young family that came to Spring Forest, started participating in things that we do about 7 or 8 months ago. And they had come from California, and so their first interest was healthy, locally grown food, because the mom really is a health food person. So that was the first thing that attracted them. But as we got to know the family and worked side by side in the fields together, and then had some socializing experiences together, I noticed that she really cared a lot for children having good formation. Then come to find out, she writes curriculum for summer camps for children, and she writes curriculum for one of these classic charter schools where the kids learn classics, you know, the old school way. So she writes curriculum for these. That's what she does for a living. And meanwhile, she was saying this would be a great place for a summer camp for kids. So I'm noticing, okay, this is her passion, this is her skill set, and she's noticing this would be a great place at Spring Forest for a day camp. So I said, well, what do you think about designing a summer day camp here, and we can include the immigrant kids, and we can really make this special? And she said, I would love to do that. So she just went ahead and wrote that curriculum. and got it all ready to go, and now we've got a box of T-shirts, and we've got everything ready to go. So that's what I'm talking about. That's different than me sitting in my office deciding I need to go shoulder tap somebody and ask them if they would just get involved with some children's ministry. So when you develop ministries based on strategic intent, it comes from the gifts and the calling of the Holy Spirit in the people. Does that make sense? So we need to pay attention to who and what is coming toward us. We also need to pay attention to where energy is rising, energy is growing, and where the energy is being drained out of us. Just drain the daylights out of us. I'm sure you know what that's like in a church setting, where there's a tiredness, there's no energy left, there's no interest, it's dry, it's dead, and you know this could be true of any sort of ministry. So we try to notice where is the energy rising, and then we go with that. And if there's something that's draining the daylights out of us, we try to figure out why and then stop doing that. Which is, so these practices help us to stay very fluid, very agile. We can pivot, we can change something. We also have a shame-free zone where we encourage a lot of risk, a lot of experimentation, and there's no shame when anything fails, because that's how we learn things, right? That's where wisdom comes from failing and suffering. So we don't shame each other or ourselves. If we try something and it didn't work out so well, we're like, well, that didn't work out. Let's not keep doing that. And what can we learn from it, that it didn't work out so well? You know, is there something there? Because every experiment matters. It doesn't have to last forever. And then another thing that we do is if somebody has a great idea, but it's going to take some resources. Usually ideas take resources. First of all, human resources, and oftentimes some financial resources or space resources or something. So we look to see when the idea and the resources come together, and then we give it a go. If there's an idea but no resources, we don't do it. If there are resources but not a good idea, we don't do it. So we just wait until those... My friend John Boggs calls this Holy Spirit efficiency. That if we'll watch when these things come together, then it's going to probably work. So we do that as well. And then finally, we keep that rule of life in mind. Is this idea, is this thing that we're thinking about doing, is this consistent with our commitment to pray, to work together, to table together for the sake of our neighbors? Is this for our neighbors, or is this not for our neighbors? And so we think about that very seriously. If it's not for our neighbors, we just don't do it. It has to be for our neighbors, because we understand that the identity of the church is to be God's sent out people who are good news. The message that paraphrased by Eugene Peterson, John 1:14 says, "Then the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood." And we believe this is our work, to be flesh and blood and move into the neighborhood. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yeah. Mm-hmm. You're welcome. This is one of the features of the new monasticism, and there are several books about it. it creates this cycle where we feel like everything has to happen in the building because we paid so much for the building. You know what I'm saying? And it's got grandma's name on the plaque over there on the organ, and we better keep, you know. And so it creates this sort of thing. So part of the new monastic movement emphases is to get away from that and to realize, no, the Word needs to become flesh and blood and move into the neighborhood. So, yeah. Yeah, the 500-year. Yeah, okay, so Phyllis Tickle, who is a good Episcopalian, by the way, and I think she was a sociologist of religion or something like that. She wasn't a theologian and died not too long ago. She was actually quoting a bishop who said that about every 500 years or so the church has a big rummage sale and gets rid of things that don't work so well. And so approximately 500 years ago, there were some things that were happening more broadly in the world that really impacted the church. Can any of you remember one of those things that happened about 500 years ago that changed everything? Yes. That's right. So some of those scientific discoveries changed everything about travel, that changed everything about trade. And then there was something invented that changed everything about communication. Yes, the Gutenberg press was invented, and now it was possible to make Bibles that people could read, but you had to teach people to read, right? So now you had the possibility of Bibles produced on a mass scale that the world had never seen, and that changed everything. And so so whenever one of these 500-year sort of things happen, it's because of massive political change coupled with economic changes, the trade routes and all that, the rise of the merchant class, and communication and information changes. So around that time all that was happening, that's when the Protestant Reformation movements started to break out. And it wasn't just one, there were multiple movements. And so that changed everything. And so if you go back 500 years before that, you can also find a cluster of things that changed. Well, we're in one of those times now, and some people have criticized Phyllis Tickle for making this sort of a simple formula, saying that, no, there's always change going on. Yeah, there's change going on. But whenever you have a situation where you have massive changes in the political sector, in the communication and information and technology sector, like right now we have with computers and all that kind of stuff and medical advances, and in military and in trade and all that, when that's going on, it's going to impact the church in a huge way. That's what's going on right now. And this is why the church that we've inherited, in many ways there's institutional collapse going on across denominations, across religions. But something new is rising. And so Phyllis Tickle's work had to do with what's rising now and how can we participate with the new thing that God is doing now. This is also what Brian McLaren is concerned about, what Richard Rohr is concerned about. It's what I'm concerned about. And all of us are conversation partners, by the way. We're all concerned about this. How can we help followers of Jesus be faithful and follow Jesus through this new, what I'm calling a new Reformation? How can we do that? Well, I see people are going, they're probably going to choir practice or somewhere, or church. Okay, so I think our time is finished, but thank you very much. You've been great.
Thank you, Elaine. And I remind you, there are some of her books up here if you would like to purchase a book. And feel free to, we have plenty of refreshments back there. Take home an apple or a tangerine, mandarin orange, or whatever you like.